Hey friends, the new Warhammer Commander pre-constructed deck, the Ruinous Powers, has just been revealed, so it's time to do a deep dive on all the sweet new cards that are coming in the deck. But before we begin, two quick reminders. First, if you like this sort of content, be sure to like and subscribe. There's two more Warhammer Commander decks coming out in the next 2 days, and I'm going to have a video covering each one. And number two, if you want to pre-order these sweet new Commander decks, you can head on over to our sponsor, cardkingdom.com/mtggoldfish, and be sure to ask for a scoop sticker in the order notes. Alright, it's time to check out the Chaos deck, the Ruinous Powers. So, the phase commander of this deck is Abaddon the Despoiler, and it covers one of the main themes of the deck, which is going to be cascading and, more broadly speaking, casting stuff from exile. So Abaddon the Despoiler is a Grixis commander. It's 5 mana, 5/5, legendary creature, Astartes warrior with trample, and has Mark of Chaos Ascendant. During your turn, spells you cast from your hand with mana value X or less have Cascade, where X is the total amount of life your opponents have lost this turn. So Abaddon's all about dishing out tons of damage to your opponents each turn. He's himself already a 5/5 with trample, so he can get the job done himself, but you're going to have a lot of giant demons who are going to be helping you deal that damage as well. And once you dish out some damage, the spells you cast from your hand have Cascade, generating both mana advantage and card advantage, albeit in a random way, which is very fitting for a Chaos deck. So Abaddon is a fantastic commander for what this deck is all about, which is about cascading, casting stuff from exile, and some other themes that we're going to be covering shortly. However, if you want to take Abaddon outside of this pre-constructed deck, there's a couple cards that I would suggest maybe using him for as upgrades. Outside of combat, there's a lot of ways to efficiently make your opponents lose a ton of life, so you can always be cascading with Abaddon's ability. Stuff like Descent into Avernus, Loyal Subordinate, and Duskmantle Seer are going to make your opponents lose a ton of life each turn, which is going to make Abaddon's Cascade trigger that much more reliable. And in terms of upgrades for the deck as well, the suspend cards, Profane Tutor, Inevitable Betrayal, and Ancestral Vision have very powerful effects and normally couldn't be cast from your hand. You usually have to suspend them and wait a couple turns before you get their effect, but Abaddon the Despoiler, the way Cascade is worded, you can actually cascade into these spells because they do have a mana value of 0, and this is an alternate casting cost, so you can actually cascade into these spells and get some amazing value. Profane Tutor lets you basically Demonic Tutor up a card into your hand. Inevitable Betrayal is basically a 0 mana value bribery effect in this deck, and Ancestral Vision is just an Ancestral Recall. You draw 3 cards. So these are ways of abusing a Cascade style deck and are fantastic upgrades as well. And also, if you want to build on Abaddon's Cascade effect, you can add cards like Prosper Tomebound, which is going to generate treasure tokens whenever you're casting stuff from exile, such as with Cascade. Passionate Archaeologist is going to be dealing damage each time you're casting spells from Cascade. And now Fenshi is also going to be copying spells that you're casting from Cascade as well. So there's a lot of ways to upgrade Abaddon, and not only is he a fantastic commander for this pre-constructed deck, but he has a lot of room for upgrading and building a deck dedicated to this specific commander. Now, there's a secondary theme in this deck as well, and that is Demon Tribal. And we have a secondary commander in the 99 that you can actually just replace with Abaddon if you want, and that is Be'lakor the Dark Master. This is a 6-drop Grixis 6/5 legendary creature, Demon Noble, with flying and 2 abilities. Prince of Chaos, when it enters the battlefield, you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of demons you control, and Lord of Torment, whenever another demon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So this kind of focuses on the second theme of the deck, which is going to be Demon Tribal and Aggression. So you're going to find a lot of very big demons as a top-end curve in this deck. A lot of them can be cheated into play in very unique ways that we're going to check out later, and Be'lakor really takes advantage of that. Not only does it enter the battlefield, draws you some cards, but then when your demons are entering the battlefield, you're just taking out random targets on the battlefield, picking off creatures, and doming people in the face for lethal. So this is a great way to just marriage together card advantage and also damage in a beautiful way. And I think also, like Abaddon, you can take Be'lakor and build an entire deck around it, very focused on this specific commander. So what you could do with it, one of the ways that I'm really excited for is actually using Garuda as a companion. If your starting deck contains only cards with even converted mana cost, like Be'lakor, which is a 6-drop, you have a Demon Kraken companion in your companion zone, and it has a cool ability. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent mills the top 4 card of their library, and then you put a creature card with an even mana value from among those cards onto the battlefield under your control. You can go all in with Garuda, actually, and run a bunch of even mana value clone effects like Sakashima of 1,000 Faces, so that they get milled and then reanimated by Garuda, copy Garuda, and then continue the cycle by milling and hopefully finding another clone, copying Garuda again. And keep in mind that Garuda is a demon, so every single time these Garuda or Garuda clones are entering the battlefield, Be'lakor is doming somebody for 6 every single time. So it gets out of control very quickly. And other cards you can run into the deck going Demon Tribal is stuff like Rakdos, the Showstopper, which is basically an asymmetrical kind of randomized board wipe against non-demon creatures, which is fantastic in the deck. So Be'lakor or Abaddon, I feel, are both great commanders in their own right. They work great in the precon because both the precon supports cascading and casting stuff from exile and also Demon Tribal. But as you can see, you can take either one and make a very tuned list, focus on their established archetypes. Be'lakor is all about Demon Tribal, and Abaddon is all about cascading and furthermore casting stuff from exile. Moving on, we've got another legendary creature that can be a commander in a deck, but not the commander of this one because it only has Izzet color identity, whereas the entire deck is Grixis colored. This is Magnus the Red. This is an Izzet 6-drop, 4/5 legendary creature, Demon Primarch with flying and 2 abilities. Unearthly Power, instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each creature token you control, and Blade of Magnus. Whenever Magnus the Red deals combat damage to a player, create a 3/3 red spawn creature token. So kind of a sub-theme of this deck is a higher emphasis on instants and sorcery spells, at least more than the Tyrannid Swarm that we looked at yesterday. But like I said, it's not an eligible commander for the entire pre-constructed deck, and nor is instant and sorceries what I would say a primary focus of the deck either. It's more of a sub-focus. However, I think Magnus is going to be a fantastic candidate leading a commander deck on its own. And so if you want to take Magnus and build a deck around him, you can check out other similar Izzet Spellslinger decks that also have that focus on lowering the colorless cost of your instant and sorcery spells. Mizzix of the Magnus also lowers the cost of instant sorcerers, and so does Vadrik Astral Archmage. They all do it different ways, and you can see that Magnus has a focus on creature tokens. The more creatures you have on the battlefield, the more tokens you have on the battlefield, the cheaper your spells cost, whereas Mizzix cares about the number of instant sorcerers you're casting, and Vadrik cares about the power of Vadrik itself. So what do you want to be doing with Magnus? Well, you do typical Izzet Spellslinger things, honestly. Izzet Spellslinger is all about creating token. There's a ton of ways to create tokens whenever casting instants of sorceries. Talran, Sky Summoner, Young Pyromancer, Murmuring Mystic. These are all super efficient creature token generators in a Spellslinger deck, and they just fit in Magnus the Red just like they fit in basically any Izzet Spellslinger deck. Magnus is definitely not carving out new ground, let's say, in terms of Izzet Spellslinger, and Izzet itself basically just does either instants and sorceries or artifacts these days. So while it's not exactly reinventing the wheel for Izzet, the nice thing is that basically all the support that you would need for a Magnus deck already exists, so it's pretty easy to assemble that deck. And I don't know anything about Warhammer 40k, but the art looks really sweet. And if I was a Warhammer player, I think I would play a Magnus deck. That sounds really neat. Moving on, we got a new saga. Each of the pre-constructed decks come with a cool looking saga, and this one is the Horus Heresy. This is a 6-mana Grixis saga that has 3 chapters. The first chapter says, for each opponent, gain control of up to 1 target non-legendary creature that player controls for as long as the Horus Heresy remains on the battlefield. Number 2 is draw a card for each creature you control but don't own. And finally, the third chapter is starting with you. Each player chooses a creature. Destroy each creature chosen this way. So overall, this is an interesting saga. I think it's good, but it could also be not so good. Let me explain. The first chapter can only steal non-legendary creatures, and if this was printed, let's say, a decade ago, when there was far fewer legendary creatures, then this would be a very strong ability. You'd usually just grab the best creature on the battlefield at any given time. However, ever since, I guess, Year of the Commander, which was like 4 years ago, I think, at this point, basically every other creature is legendary. So 9 times out of 10, the best creature on the battlefield is going to be legendary, not going to be something that you can steal. However, I think you're going to be able to steal some good stuff pretty much every single time. You're going to get value out of that first chapter ability very immediately. It's also great with sacrifice outlets. Like if you have ways of sacrificing these creatures before you would have to give them back before you sacrifice the saga, that's really good. Chapter 2, you get to draw basically 3 cards if you get to steal 3 creatures, 1 for each opponent. That's really sweet. And then number 3 is kind of weird. Your opponents get to choose creatures that are going to be destroyed, and you don't really have any immunity in that. So your opponents can all just choose your creatures, and you get to choose one of your opponent's creatures, which doesn't seem like a great deal for a 6-drop saga that has to wait 2 turns for it to happen. So I'm not a big fan of that one, but the chapter 1 and chapter 2 I like quite a bit. So what are we going to be doing with the Horus Heresy? Outside of the pre-constructed deck, I'm thinking other homes for it could be Evelyn the Covetous, which is another way of stealing opposing creatures, which will get a lot of extra value from the second chapter. Because if you're stealing other creatures from your opponents through exiling them and then casting them, then chapter 2 becomes a lot better. Same thing with Marchesa the Black Rose. The way Marchesa actually works is threat and effects are very good because you can steal creatures, attack with them, put counters on them with Marchesa, sacrifice them, and then Marchesa will have those creatures re-enter the battlefield on your side of the battlefield permanently. It's a cheeky way of using threat and effects to make them permanent. And those type of commanders might want the Horus Heresy, mostly for that chapter 2 ability and also chapter 1 ability, especially for Marchesa. So these are just more things to consider for the saga outside of the pre-constructed deck. Moving on, we have Sloppity Bilepiper? What? Okay, that is a 10 out of 10 name. This is a 4-drop black 3/3 creature demon with Jolly Gut Pipes. Pay 2, tap it, sacrifice a creature. The next creature spell you cast this turn has Cascade. So this is a sacrifice outlet with a cascading twist to it. Generally speaking, I like my sacrifice outlets to not cost mana and not require tapping, so you can use it as you need, repeatedly and instant speed. Those are 2 qualities that I usually look for my sacrifice outlets. However, the payoff here is really good, especially in decks that care about stuff from exile, obviously. Being able to cascade your next creature spell is really good. It basically doubles the efficiency of some of your creatures. You're getting mana advantage and you're getting card advantage out of it. And that is worth paying 2 mana and tapping it for a 4-drop, especially with its fantastic name. So things I would do with this card outside of the pre-constructed deck, well, obviously inside the pre-constructed deck, Be'lakor as your commander, this becomes a lot better because it is a demon. And also, if it's going to be cascading into another demon spell, then you get even more triggers off Lord of Torment. However, outside of this pre-constructed deck, I think the Sloppity Bilepiper would be great in like Ayara First of the Lockaway, and also because it is cascading, Prosper Tomebound will get extra value out of it because each time you cast a spell with Cascade, cast a spell from Cascade rather, you're going to create a treasure token as well, so that's also very nice. Moving on, We got Keeper of Secrets. This is an expensive mono red demon, a 6-drop, 6/4 creature demon with first strike and haste and Symphony of Pain. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, Keeper of Secrets deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to target opponent. So this is a hasty, big, aggressive creature. It's going to get in there easily for damage, and it works perfectly with Abaddon. Abaddon wants you to deal damage so you can cascade all the spells in your hand, and then whenever you're cascading spells, Keeper of Secrets is going to dish out even more damage. So it works perfectly with Abaddon, and it's a fantastic inclusion in this deck. And I think outside of this deck, again, looking at this in terms of like what else you can put this card into in terms of other decks outside of the pre-constructed deck, anything that cares about casting stuff from exile is going to be really good. So Yidris is another example of a good cascade deck that will be casting a bunch of spells from exile. We already mentioned Evelyn, but also casts stuff from exile. And in Boros, you can put, since it's mono red, you can also put this in a Boros deck like Commander Liara Porter, which is also another fantastic Exile Matters type of commander. And I think Keeper of Secrets is going to be fantastic in all of these. Like, it is a fantastic beater. It dishes out serious damage, and it also dishes out extra damage once you're exiling stuff, which is great. It's a great threat for any sort of Exile Matters deck, and it's definitely worth 6 mana just hard casting it, really. All right, next up we got Let the Galaxy Burn. This is an X5 in a red, so 6 mana minimum for a sorcery with Cascade, and Let the Galaxy Burn deals X plus 2 damage to each creature that didn't enter the battlefield this turn. And the idea here is that if you cast Let the Galaxy Burn and then you Cascade into a creature, Let the Galaxy Burn is not going to burn that creature to just enter the battlefield. Or if you have, tons of mana and you cast a bunch of creatures first, and then ramp into Let the Galaxy Burn, for example, then those creatures will be untouched as well. But it works pretty much with the Cascade ability. That said, I don't think this card's really good. Obviously, it's decent in a deck that's all about Exile Matters, like Abaddon, for example. You get a lot of inherent synergies there. However, the damage is just kind of low for the mana cost, I think. Like, you're going to have to spend... you're spending 6 mana to Cascade and deal 2 damage to each creature that didn't enter the battlefield. And then you can spend more mana, but like, more than 6 mana, that's a lot to ask for. I don't know if this card's very good. Obviously, it has synergy potential, so it's good in Cascade decks, but I think it's one of the weaker ones, even with the synergy here. Next up, though, we got Kill, Maim, Burn. This is a Rakdos 5 mana instant spell with choose 1 or more 3 modes. Destroy target artifact, destroy target creature, and Kill, Maim, Burn deals 3 damage to target player. So you're always going to have basically 3 targets for this. In a commander deck, obviously you're going to be dealing 3 damage to a player. You're always going to have basically a creature that you want to destroy, and you're always going to have an artifact that you want to destroy. So it's expensive, it's 5 mana, and the value of dealing 3 damage to a player in most decks is not going to be that relevant, I think. But destroying an artifact, destroying a creature at instant speed is always going to be super relevant. And this is going to be extra relevant in an Abaddon deck because, like we mentioned earlier, the Cascade trigger is based on how much damage you deal to players. So this is 3 extra damage equals, you can cast a spell that costs 3 more and Cascade off it with Abaddon. In terms of comparisons here, I just wanted to show, like, these are other cards that kind of do similar effects. Bedevil is also a Rakdos card. It's a 3-drop instant, and it can destroy an artifact, creature, or planeswalker, but you can only choose one of those. And then Kolaghan's Command is a bit of a stretch. You can destroy an artifact, and I guess you can destroy a creature or a creature that is power 2 or less, or toughness 2 or less, or deal 2 damage to a player. So I would say Kill, Maim, Burn is actually not super overcosted. I think it is fairly costed and not a bad pick. The only problem is that 5 mana is just a lot. Even though it is fairly costed for what it's doing, just the amount of slots you have for a 5-drop is more competitive because there's just less that you're allowed to have because you don't want to be too top heavy. So I don't know. It's good here, obviously, in the pre-constructed deck, but would I run it outside of the pre-con? Probably not, unless I have ways of making it significantly cheaper to cast, for example. Next up, though, we have a really cool, polymorph type creature. This is Aspiring Champion. It's a 4-mana red 3/3 creature, Astartes warrior with Menace and Ruinous Ascension. When Aspiring Champion deals combat damage to a player, sacrifice it. If you do, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle the rest of your library. If the creature is a demon, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So obviously this is extra spicy and a demon tribal deck. You really want to hit a demon off that. Demons are naturally pretty big. They have power 5 or higher usually, so doing all that extra damage is really good. In terms of what we're going to be doing with it, obviously if Be'lakor is the commander of this deck, it gets much better because you're going to basically double dip on that extra damage, because Be'lakor is also going to be dealing damage when a demon enters the battlefield. You don't always hit a demon, obviously, even in the pre-constructed deck, but when you do, it gets very spicy. Outside of that, though, if you want to run this in other sort of decks, any deck that wants to run Sneak Attack, for example, is going to be really good because you're going to sacrifice Aspiring Champion anyway, so casting it for 1 mana instead of 4 is just a nice discount. Obviously, Sneak Attack on a stick, Perforos Bronze-Blooded, is another fantastic option, especially if you go mono red demon tribal, which sounds actually super cool. That would be a really good option. So yeah, there's a lot of potential here for Aspiring Champion. I think is a fairly costed card that I could see play in multiple decks, not just this pre-constructed deck. Next up, though, we got the Ruinous Powers. This is a Rakdos 4-mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose an opponent at random, exile a top card of that player's library. Until end of turn, you may play that card, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. When you cast a spell this way, its owner loses life equal to its mana value. So this is mostly comparable to Stolen Strategy, which instead of choosing an opponent at random, you get to basically just exile off each opponent's library, which is better, but it does cost 1 more mana. It has a similar effect. However, when you do cast a spell off Stolen Strategy, the opponents don't lose life equal to its mana value. So the Ruinous Powers is more aggressive. It costs a little bit less than Stolen Strategy. However, you basically don't get as much value out of it every single turn because Stolen Strategy is going to look at 3 libraries in a 4-player game. The other thing though to note with the Ruinous Powers is you can play lands off the top of people's library that gets exiled. Stolen Strategy does not allow you to do that. So they're both good cards. They both fit the same sort of deck. I think the Ruinous Powers is a little bit better in a deck led by Abaddon, just because that life loss is relevant, especially because it just allows you to cascade more with Abaddon. But they're both really good cards, and in whichever deck wants the Ruinous Powers also wants Stolen Strategy. Next up, we got another legendary creature, Mortarion Daemon Primarch. This is a 6-drop, black, 5/6 legendary creature, Demon Primarch with flying, and Primarch of the Death Guard. At the beginning of your end step, you may pay X. If you do, create X 2/2 black Astartes warrior creature tokens with Menace. X can't be greater than the amount of life you lost this turn. So 6 mana is a lot. However, you get a good value for what you pay for. It's a 5/6 flyer, so this is a lot of damage with evasion, and it is a great, super efficient way of generating a lot of tokens every single turn if you have ways of spending your life. And thankfully you are in a black deck, so there's going to be a lot of stuff that basically lets you spend life to draw cards. That's one of the most common ways of doing it. In the pre-constructed deck, I don't think Mortarion is going to be particularly great. Like, we saw ways of actually cheating Mortarion out onto the battlefield for cheaper, for less than 6, and that makes it very tasty. However, if you put him in a different style, a different shell of a deck, I think he's going to perform a lot better. So I was thinking cards like Necropotence is probably the hallmark way of drawing cards super efficiently by paying life. And then a deck that runs Mortarion and Necropotence also probably wants to run another demon that's legendary, Vilis Broker of Blood, where also when you're losing life, you're going to be drawing cards. So with Villas and Mortarion and Necropotence on the battlefield. You draw all the cards. You can spend all your mana, dump it into making as many tokens as you want, and it's all good times. So Mortarion, I think, is going to be really nice in this pre-constructed deck, but if you do upgrade him, he gets even more fun. All right, moving on, we got Venomcrawler, which is a 4-drop black 2/2 artifact creature demon with lifelink and Devourer of Souls. Whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Venomcrawler. So it's a demon, so it works well in the demon deck. It grows as long as stuff is dying, which is nice, and has lifelink, so it does keep your life total nice and high as it just passively grows on the battlefield. It is comparable to cards like Ob Nixilis Unshackled, which also has the whenever another creature dies trigger, put a counter on it. And same thing with Orca Siege Demon. You can see these cost a lot more mana than Venomcrawler. They have other abilities, obviously, and they start off as much bigger. But Venomcrawler, you can see, is actually pretty efficient in terms of how it was priced in terms of mana value. So it is a good beater. It is a nice, solid threat on the battlefield, and it is a demon, so it is a relevant creature type in this deck. All right, next up, we have Tallyman of Nurgle. This is a black 3 mana, 2/3 creature Astartes warrior with lifelink and the 7-fold chant. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. If 7 or more creatures died this turn, instead you draw 7 cards and you lose 7 life. So this is a nice incremental draw engine in an aristocrat style deck. As we saw a little bit earlier, there's a lot of creatures that kind of kill themselves to summon demons, for example. So this is a great way of turning those into extra value, drawing extra cards in the process. It is a 2/3 with lifelink, so if there is any opportunity to get in there and gain some life in the process, that's kind of nice as well. Overall, it's not particularly great as a draw engine. We have better options in terms of card draw when stuff dies. I'm thinking like Morbid Opportunist, which does this every single end step, not just your own. The nice thing, though, is if you do sacrifice a lot of creatures, 7 or more, then you get to draw a ton more cards, too. That's kind of sweet. So it's all right. It's pretty good. It's a fair rate, but it's not super exciting outside of this pre-constructed deck. Next up, though, we got Poxwalkers, which is going to go really well with this kind of like aristocrat sub-theme going on in this pre-constructed deck. It's another mono black 3-drop, a 3/1 creature zombie with Death Touch and Curse of the Walking Pox. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, return Poxwalkers from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So there's a lot of creatures that are these self-recursive types of threats available in Commander, and this one is focusing specifically on casting stuff from exile. It works very well with Abaddon, obviously, because of Cascade all triggering this. And it is a 3/1 of Death Touch, making it a fantastic, not only just a fantastic blocker, but if somebody has a Monarch, if you need to get in there for damage, again, to help Abaddon Cascade, for example, nobody really wants to trade your random recursive 3/1 3-drop zombie for their better creatures that probably aren't self-recursive. So this is a great not only blocker, but also a threat that can kind of turn on Abaddon and works very well with Abaddon as well. And it has 1 toughness, so if you do have a Skull Clamp that you want to jam into this deck, it's a fantastic Skull Clamp option, I'm just saying. Moving on, we got Plague Drone. This is a 4-drop black 3/3 creature demon with flying and Rotfly. If an opponent would gain life, that player loses that much life instead. So this is just a nice way of curbing your opponent's life gain. A lot of decks have just random incidental life gain, but there are life gain archetype decks out there, and this is a great way to just punish them aggressively if they're trying to do any of that sort of shenanigans. There's an enchantment called Tainted Remedy that does the exact same thing for 3 mana, but it doesn't come on a 3/3 flying demon. So the fact that it is a demon, it flies, it can smash people for 3 in the air, is making it justified to cost 1 extra mana for that payoff. Next, we got a cool enchantment aura, Nurgle's Rot. This is 1 black mana for an aura that says, enchant creature an opponent controls When an enchanted creature dies, return Nurgle's Rot to its owner's hand, and you create a 1/3 black demon creature token named Plaguebearer of Nurgle. What I imagine a cool use of this card would be is in a sacrifice style deck. If you have Grave Pact effects, for example, like Ayara, we showed Ayara earlier. Like, let's say you have a random black creature on the battlefield, you sacrifice it to Ayara, and you have Grave Pact out. So now when you sacrifice the creature, each opponent has to sacrifice a creature. They have to sacrifice a creature with the rot on it. That makes you another black demon creature token. You sacrifice that for value. They have to sacrifice their creatures again. You rot something else. They have to sacrifice that. You make another creature. You sacrifice that creature. You rot something else. Woo! That is some good value engines that are bound to make your opponents very miserable. Next, we have an also very interesting reanimation spell, Nurgle's Conscription. This is a 5-mana black instant that says put target creature card from an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield tapped under your control, then exile that player's graveyard. So black has a lot of very efficient ways of reanimating creatures, mostly from their own graveyard, but there are some ways of doing that from other people's graveyard, but they're usually at sorcery speed. The two hallmarks of black reanimation are Reanimate, which is a 1-mana sorcery, and like Animate Dead, which is a 2-mana sorcery, or like Necromancy, which you can do at instant speed, but only keep the creature for 1 turn, but you can do at sorcery speed for 3 mana. So at 5 mana, you can reanimate a creature from an opponent's graveyard, and you get to exile a graveyard, which is really nice. So it's both graveyard hate and reanimation, and the fact that you can do it at instant speed makes it very unique. There really aren't that many options out there for reanimating creatures at instant speed, especially from your opponent's graveyard. And you couple that with some graveyard hate, and this card is actually pretty legit. I would maybe run it in Toshiro Umezawa, for example. All right, next up, we have a very interesting board wipe, Mandate of Abaddon. This is a 4-mana black sorcery with choose target creature you control, destroy all creatures with power less than that creature's power. Now, this is a cool inverse of some white sorceries that do the same thing, but the other way around. There is Retribution of the Meek, Dust to Dawn, Faded Retribution, I think. There's a couple of them. So basically, there's a bunch of sorceries in white that say you destroy creatures with power higher than some sort of threshold. And this is the opposite. It's actually power less than. So this is good for like a go tall style deck or just big beefy creatures. You choose one of your beefiest creatures or your least beefy creatures rather. Like if you have a bunch of 6/6s and a 4/4, you choose the 4/4 and then you destroy everything that is smaller than the 4/4. So if anybody's like a weenie deck, a token deck, a go wide deck, Mandate of Abaddon is going to be a fantastic asymmetrical board wipe in your big beefy style deck, which is great for demons. So yeah, I think this card is great in the pre-constructed deck, but also a fantastic new inclusion in multiple other sorts of decks as well. Next we got Great Unclean One. This is a black 5-drop 4/5 creature demon with reverberating summons. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses 2 life. Then for each opponent who has less life than you, create a 1/3 black demon creature token named Plaguebearer of Nurgle. So this is a great way of just dishing out some guaranteed damage to each opponent, and you're probably going to be making a bunch of tokens at the same time, so it works very well with Abaddon. I think the entire package is pretty cost efficient. You're basically making your opponents lose a net 6 life and netting maybe up to like 3 1/3 demon tokens each time it triggers. However, I don't know, for a 5-drop, those 5-drop slots are pretty competitive. This card's fantastic in the pre-constructed deck, but outside of it, I probably would skip over it. Next, we've got a very unique pseudo board wipe called Blight Grenade. It's a 5-mana black sorcery, destroy target creature, all creatures get -3/-3 until end of turn. And this is another great way of basically sweeping the board of go wide decks or weenie decks or 1/1 tribal style decks. You destroy some big target, it will for sure die. And you're going to wipe the board of the smallest creatures on the battlefield. Your deck, if your deck is focused on larger creatures like 4/4s and 5/5s and stuff like that, then this is a great effect because it doesn't affect your board. And yeah, this is actually pretty sweet. I think this card also has a lot of potential, not just in this pre-constructed deck full of demons, but also a nice option for any beefy black deck that's looking to get some more asymmetrical board hate. Next, we've got Lord of Change. This is a 7-mana, 6/6 creature demon, flying ward 3, and Architect of Deception. When Lord of Change enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards. So this is basically the big brother of Muldrifter. 7 mana instead of like 5, but it's a 6/6 flying ward 3, so it is a huge beater, and it draws 3 cards instead of drawing 2. Ooh, this card is very expensive. If I'm paying 7 mana for a spell, I want it to be a huge haymaker. And while this card is actually very good, I don't know if I would want to spend 7 mana for it. However, it is a creature, so that means you have ways of cheating this onto the battlefield. Sneak attack effects, for example, reanimation effects, for example, are all great ways of getting it onto the battlefield for significantly cheaper. Polymorph effects are also really good with it too. However, if I was in a deck that is hard casting this, I'd probably pass. I don't know. It is a nice beater. It draws 3 cards. These are all great things. It works very well with blink effects and stuff like that. But I just would not want to spend 7 mana on this effect, just because at the 7 mana territory, you usually have stuff that kind of win you the game, and this does not, even though it's very good. However, if you are in a deck that can cheat it out for a lot less mana, then Lord of Change becomes really, really solid. Next up, we got another cool demon, Pink Horror. This is a 5-drop, 5-drop, 4/4 creature demon horror with 2 abilities. A word that I don't know how to pronounce, Cascading Flames. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Pink Horror deals 2 damage to any target, and split. When Pink Horror dies, create 2/2 blue and red demon horror creature tokens named Blue Horror. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, this creature deals 1 damage to any target. So this is great for Spellslinger. You can basically turn all your cantrips and low-cost spells that you're going to be casting into damage, taking out opposing creatures, or just burning opponents to the face. It works very well with curiosity effects, obviously. Whenever enchanted creature deals damage to an opponent, you draw a card. So you can slap a 1-mana curiosity effect on Pink Horror, start casting a bunch of cantrips, ponders, preordains, opts, and stuff like that. Deal 2 damage to your opponent's faces, and draw a bunch of cards in the process. It is on the expensive side. There are like gutter snipe effects and stuff that deal more damage to your opponents and cost less mana than Pink Horror. However, this has the flexibility of being able to ping down opposing creatures as well. And when it does die, you still get 2 more horrors, which are also going to be pinging people as well. So I think overall, this is a pretty good, fairly costed spell. Next, we've got Heralds of Tzeentch. I don't know how to pronounce that word. The Heralds of Tzeentch, I'm just going to call it like that. It's a 5-drop blue, 3/3 creature demon with flying and cascade. If you want to be in a cascade deck, exile matters, and this is just a nice filler card that will let you cascade. You'll cascade into something 4 or less, which is Dees. It's a 3/3 flyer, which is Dees. But I wouldn't want to put it into other decks, if you know what I mean. It's fine in the pre-constructed deck. It's a demon, it cascades, it's exactly what you want it to do, but it's not like awe-inspiring or anything. Next, we have another legendary creature, Lucius the Eternal. This is a Rakdos 5-drop, 5/3 with haste and Armor of Shrieking Souls. Ooh, very cool sounding. When Lucius the Eternal dies, exile it and choose target creature an opponent controls. When that creature leaves the battlefield, return Lucius from exile to the battlefield under its owner's control. So it's just a self-recursive, hasty 5/3 beater. It's probably going to trade in combat pretty easily, but the fact that it's always going to come back eventually makes it a fun, recursive threat that is pretty efficient at what it's doing. Now, would I build a commander deck around it or really build around it at all? Probably not. It's just a cool recursive threat, but it doesn't really inspire me personally in any way outside of that. Next, we've got Tzaangor Shaman, which is a 4-mana, 3/3 creature mutant shaman, flying on a cool little disc, and it has Sorcerer's Elixir. Whenever Tzaangor Shaman deals combat damage to a player, copy the next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn when you cast it. you may choose new targets for the copy. So it's a repeatable reverberate or twin cast or whatever you want to say. Every single time it's deal combat damage to a player. It works really nice if you have double strike or something on that. I think this is a fairly unique effect in terms of dealing combat damage to copy spells. Fairly powerful and pretty sweet, I would say. It's a cool card. Moving on though, we got Mutalith Vortex Beast. This is a 6 mana Izzet 6/6 creature mutant beast with trample and warp vortex. When it enters the battlefield, flip a coin for each opponent you have. For each flip you win, draw a card. For each flip you lose, it deals 3 damage to that player. So in a typical 4-player game, you're going to have 3 opponents, you're going to flip 3 coins, and you're going to draw some cards, and you're going to deal some damage to players, and it's a 6/6 trampler. And I think the 6/6 trampling part is the really fun part here. Drawing some cards, dealing some extra damage is nice too. Obviously, it works very well with Abaddon. It is on a demon, which is a little bit weird. I would have expected it to be a demon for being in this deck and all. But it is a nice, solid beater. Would I run it outside of this deck? I'd probably put it maybe in a coin flip deck, to be honest, like a Zinder Split style deck. That could be kind of fun as a top end that just deals a lot of damage, and it flips 3 coins, which is kind of fun. In this deck, it seems alright as well, but it is a 6-drop, and it is not a demon, which I am a little bit surprised about. Alright, next up we got an enchantment, The Lost and the Damned. It is an Izzet 3-drop enchantment that says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control from anywhere other than your hand, or you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, create a 3/3 red spawn creature token. So obviously, again, this works with the Exile Matters type theme, the Cascade theme. Whenever you're cascading stuff and casting stuff off Exile, you make it a 3/3 spawn creature token. And it even works outside of casting stuff from Exile. Like if you cast stuff from your graveyard with Flashback or Escape or whatever like that, you're also going to be making a creature token. So in the right deck, it's a super efficient creature token generator, mates a lot of threats very efficiently for 3 mana, and it's good. So yeah, any deck that basically can reliably trigger this every single turn is going to want to run this. It seems really sweet. Next though, we have an artifact creature in Rakdos. It's Helbrute. It's a 5 mana 5/4 artifact creature, Astartes Dreadnought with haste and Sarcophagus. You may cast Helbrute from your graveyard by exiling another creature from your graveyard in addition to paying its other cost. So it's kind of like a very specific type of escape. You have to escape by escaping with one creature from your graveyard. So yeah, it's another recursive threat. It's a 5/4 with haste, smashes and recurs itself pretty easily. Great pressure, and it's a great way to kind of close out games and grind out your opponents, because whenever it dies, it's going to keep coming back, and eventually your opponents are just going to die, and that's kind of sweet. Next up, we've got Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch. This is a 4 mana Izzet 2/4 demon with 2 abilities. Sorcerer's Inspiration. At the beginning of your upkeep, return an instant or sorcery card at random from your graveyard to your hand. And Fire of Tzeentch. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch deals 1 damage to each opponent. So this is kind of like a superior Charmbreaker Devils, which is a card that I absolutely loved when I started playing Commander way back in the day, but it was just overcosted. A 6-drop that randomly gets instant sorcery from your hand, while Sweet is just slow. Man, this is not what you want from a 6-drop. However, from a 4-drop, that's a little bit different. And I think its triggered ability of Instant and Sorcery is actually better too, because like I mentioned before, Curiosity effects work great with this. Whenever you're casting an Instant or Sorcery, you draw 3 cards off Curiosity with the Flamer, which is really sweet. So goodbye, Charmbreaker Devils. I loved you over a decade ago, but the Flamer is the truth these days. Next, we have a legendary equipment, which is really neat. This is Drach'Nyen. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's a 6 mana Rakdos legendary artifact equipment with 2 abilities. Echo of the First Murder. When it enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target creature, and Daemon Sword. Equipped creature has Menace and gains +X/+O, where X is the exiled creature's power, and equipped 2. So this card's really expensive, but realistically, you're going to pay 6 mana, you're going to exile a big beefy creature, hopefully something like 6 power or something like that, And then the equipped creature is going to have menace and 5 or higher power onto it too, which is not terrible. And the fact that you can blink the sword too to continually exile stuff is actually really good. It's comparable to Duplicant, actually. Duplicant is a 6-mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you get to exile a creature, and it takes its power and toughness. The exiled creature, Duplicant takes its exiled power and toughness. So that kind of feels like the template of this card. Now, obviously, it's much easier to blink a creature than it is a non-creature artifact. But if you have a deck that can realistically blink this equipment, then it becomes very good. Outside of that, though, I don't think it would be worth 6 mana, but it is very interesting. Alright, next up we have Chaos Mutation. It's 3, a blue, and a red instant spell that says exile any number of target creatures controlled by different players. For each creature exiled this way, its controller reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a creature card, puts that card onto the battlefield, and then puts the rest on the bottom of their library in a random order. So basically, it's a polymorph effect at instant speed, and you can polymorph not just your own creature, but you can polymorph basically one creature per opponent. And that's actually really good at instant speed. Polymorph, I think, is like 4 mana at instant speed, and you can only polymorph one thing. And Chaos Mutation basically is 1 per opponent, so that's basically like 4 different targets at instant speed for 1 more mana. That's pretty efficient at what it's doing. Obviously, there is some risk involved if you're exiling your opponent's creatures and hitting something even scarier, but obviously, you're going to be using it on your smallest random token thing to turn into something much better. It's almost guaranteed at that point. And if your opponent has a really scary threat, then chances are, if you exile it, you're going to get a less scary threat in comparison. So I think this card is actually really good. I wouldn't be surprised to see it run in just basically a generic token style deck. Like, it is just a good versatile removal that also turns and upgrades your own tokens into something much more threatening. So I think this card is actually gas. I think this card has a lot of value outside of the pre-constructed deck. Next, though, we have Chaos Defiler. This is a Rakdos card, 5 mana, 5/4, artifact creature demon construct with trample and battle cannon. When it enters the battlefield or dies, for each opponent, choose a non-land permanent that player controls. Destroy one of them chosen at random. Now, this card can be really good or really bad. It really depends on what you're playing against. If you're playing against a generic deck, then Chaos Defiler is very solid. When it enters battlefields and dies, you're going to be blowing up a lot of permanents. You don't have control over them, but you're going to be blowing up a lot of value. However, if you are in a meta that has a lot of tokens, for example, go wide decks with lots of like 1/1s or whatever, or just decks that have a lot of treasure tokens, like a Smothering Tithe or something on the battlefield, then Chaos Defiler becomes really bad because it doesn't specify non-tokens, unfortunately. If it specified non-tokens, this card would be super gas. However, the fact that it will hit like random treasure tokens now and then, or 1/1s tokens now and then, makes this card very unreliable, very chaotic, which is apt, but not something I would highly recommend outside of the pre-constructed deck. That said, it is still always going to be a 5/4 trampler for 5 mana, so worst case, it's also a demon, which is nice too. Worst case, it's just a nice efficient beater that has extra value as well with the battle cannon. Alright folks, we are in the home stretch. Here we have Seeker of Slaanesh. It's a 4 mana red 3/3 creature demon with haste and Allure of Slaanesh. Each opponent must attack with at least one creature each combat if able. Now, these creatures can attack you if they want to, but they must attack. And I don't know. This card is okay. If it was like forcing them to not attack you, it would be way better. But it is just a 4-drop. It's a 3/3 with haste. It's a little bit awkward that it's just a 3/3, so having haste coming in there for damage is going to be a little bit weird without any sort of evasion. It's not going to be the largest creature on the battlefield. But at least if your opponents do have to keep attacking with at least one creature, maybe there's going to be room for you to attack as well because they won't have a blocker up. However, the fact that it doesn't let them attack you makes this card, to me. I don't know. I don't think this card is very good. All right, moving on. All right, Knight Rampager. This is a 5-mana red 6/5 artifact creature knight with trample and frenzied rampage. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose an opponent at random. Knight Rampager attacks that player this combat if able. And when it dies, it deals 4 damage to target opponent chosen at random. So this is just straight up a big beefy beater. It's like very cost efficient. It's a 6/5 trampler for 5. So not like super great for its mana value, but it deals a lot of damage, and when it dies, it deals even more damage. Is this great? I don't think so. It's a beater. It's pretty efficient at what it's doing. It is very random, though. I like the art. I like that it's an artifact creature, and it's a knight, so that's kind of cool. Maybe there's some synergy potential there outside of the pre-constructed deck, but it's not a demon, and yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's very good. All right, moving on. Okay, this is a card that I actually like a lot. This is Kharn the Betrayer. This is a 4-mana red 5/1 legendary creature, Astartes Berserker, and it has 3 abilities to make it very legendary. Berserker, Kharn the Betrayer attacks or blocks each combat if able. Sigil of Corruption. When you lose control of Kharn the Betrayer, you draw 2 cards. And the Betrayer. If damage would be dealt to Kharn the Betrayer, prevent that damage, and an opponent of your choice gains control of it. So this is definitely a legendary creature that I would like to build around. It gets in there for 5 damage every single combat. It draws you cards when you lose control of it. And outside of it being sacrificed or destroyed, it's going to stick around and just reap some serious damage across the battlefield, which are all just really cool things. Now, in terms of what I'm excited for, you can use Kharn as a commander. If you take it outside of the pre-constructed deck and you just build a deck around it, I think Kharn is going to be a really cool commander to build around. Obviously, I think the most powerful card you can put in a Kharn deck is Homeward Path, because whenever you lose control of Kharn, you're going to draw 2 cards, and then boom, you just return it back to your side of the battlefield with Homeward Path. Combine that with like Pyrohemia or something like that. And yeah, you could just like pay 1 mana, deal 1 damage to entire battlefield, draw 2 cards off Kharn, give it to somebody else, return it back to your side of the battlefield with Homeward Path, rinse, repeat. Super fun, super powerful. Outside of using him as a commander, though, I think he's also great in the 99 of like Zedruu decks and Blim decks, which are all about giving your opponents gifts and generating value out of that. So I think Kharn is going to be a standout in terms of using him outside of this pre-constructed deck. Moving on, though, we got Herald of Slaanesh. This is a 3-mana red 2/2 creature demon with Locus of Slaanesh. Demon spells you cast cost 2 less to cast, and other demons you control have haste. So not much to say here. In Demon Tribal, this is going to be a great mana discount, and it gives your demons haste. So it's a fantastic staple in basically any Demon Tribal deck. Not just this pre-constructed deck, but if you're in a Rakdos deck that's Demon Tribal or whatever, this is just going to be great. It's an early drop, mana discount, and also haste enabler for your Demon Tribal deck. Very, very good, and new staple. Next, we got Dark Apostle. This is a 4-mana red 3/3 creature Astartes Warlock with Gift of Chaos. You can pay 3 and tap it. The next non-creature spell you cast this turn has Cascade. So in a Cascade deck, just basically giving all your non-creature spells Cascade is very good. It costs mana. It's a 4 mana. It doesn't have haste, and it costs 3 mana to activate it every single time. But it's Cascade on demand. That seems very good. Yeah, nice for Cascade decks. Next, we have Chaos Terminator Lord. It's a 4-mana red 3/3 creature Astartes Warrior with Lord of Chaos. At the beginning of combat on your turn, another target creature you control gains double strike until end of turn. In a deck that's all about attacking with big demons, giving your stuff double strike is very good. Just more damage is better. So this is just a nice aggressive card. I can see it also being useful in other like stompy style decks, go tall decks. For example, Xenagos, God of Revels, loves big creatures, doubles their power in fact, and gives them haste. And then Chaos Terminator Lord is just a very efficient way of giving your hugest creature double strike. So I think this card has a lot of potential outside of this pre-constructed deck as well. In basically any go tall deck, I think it's a very efficient rate of giving stuff double strike. Next up, though, we got Bloodthirster. This has probably my favorite art in the entire precon. I love the art here. It has very like Baelor vibes from Lord of the Rings. It's a 6-mana red 6/6 creature demon, flying trample, aka flample, and whenever Bloodthirster deals combat damage to a player, you untap it. After this combat phase, there is an additional combat phase, and Bloodthirster can't attack a player it has already attacked this turn. So it's essentially a Portraiser. Portraiser, I think, is a 5-drop, a 4/4 orc pirate, doesn't have flample, but when it attacks, you untap all your creatures and take an extra combat phase, and it can't attack a player it has already attacked this turn. Now, people might be very excited for this card, being like, oh my god, this is like a better Portraiser. It has flample, so it has evasion, deals more damage in the air. It's 6/6, and it does all the other things, right? However, there is a bit of a catch. It only untaps itself. It doesn't tap all your other creatures. So you're not going to usually get the benefit of extra combat phases outside of the Bloodthirster. However, if you are in a deck that has Vigilance or can grant your creatures Vigilance, so usually Boros decks can do this with like certain enchantments giving all your creatures Vigilance, then Bloodthirster becomes very insane because you can attack with it and basically give all your creatures extra combat phases. However, even outside of that, there are certain decks that are going to really just enjoy taking extra combat phases with just a single creature. Again, I mentioned Xenagos God of Revels, but Xenagos God of Revels just really cares about you attacking with a single creature. So in that deck, Bloodthirster attacks as a 12/12, then hits another person as a 24/24, and then hits a third person as a 48/48. So this is a slam dunk in Xenagos God of Revels. It's a demon, so obviously it's fantastic in the pre-constructed deck. And if you have any way of giving all your creatures Vigilance, then it is straight up like a really good Portraiser number 2 that gives itself evasion, which is really nice. Also very good with any combat triggers. If you put an equipment on it, then you get to get 3 combat triggers off it too, which is super fun. Moving on though, the last card from the deck that isn't a reprint, it is Bloodcrusher of Khorne. This is a 4-mana red 3/3 creature demon knight with trample and devastating charge. Other creatures you control have trample. So this is like I think there was like a Theros enchantment creature that was like, creatures you control have like archetype of something, creatures you control have trample, and creatures your opponents control don't have trample. I don't remember off the top of my head how much its mana value was, but it doesn't really matter because this is a demon and it's a knight. So in decks that care about demons and maybe knights as well, like Sir Gwyn, this is just a superior version of that. Giving all your stuff trample is really nice, and it seems it does it at a fairly well-costed rate. All right, phew, we got to the end of this pre-constructed deck. Hope you enjoyed this breakdown of all the brand new cards. I'm going to be back tomorrow with a full breakdown of the next pre-constructed deck. We have 2 more to go, one tomorrow, Thursday, and one on Friday. And I'm going to do a video for each one covering all the brand new cards and what my hot take is on all of them. So like and subscribe if you like this sort of content. Be sure to check out the channel tomorrow for the next video as soon as the deck is previewed. And until next time, friends, see ya!